Hey, it's Evan from Grummy's Greens, and today I'm going to be doing some soil blocking here in the nursery. It's a gorgeous sunny day in early March. If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. I'm going to be offering you some tips and tricks today about how I like to do my soil blocking. Hopefully they're helpful to you. Let's get going. Okay, so we're gonna start off with our soil mix. I don't do anything fancy with like a homemade compost blend or anything like that. It's just a lot of extra steps that I don't really have the time to commit to. For me, number one priority is speed and efficiency. You know, I think that a lot of farmers, organic farmers, get caught up in altruism, and it's very important. You know, you want to do everything as in a way that's as good for the environment as possible. And I think that a lot of us are aware of, you know, peat being a pretty harmful substance that they mine. It's got a pretty big environmental footprint, but you have to make some sacrifices here and there. And I'm on such a small scale that I don't really think I'm having a huge impact on it. I go through like not even 10 bales of soil in a season, so that's just where I'm coming from. But by all means, if you're just a home gardener, I highly encourage you to check out maybe somebody like Elliot Coleman. He's got some great books that offer some really good recipes for completely organic compost based starts for soil blocks that work really well. For me, I like to use a peat cocoa core blend. It's done by Fafard. It's called the Agro Mix G6. That's just what I use. There's a million products out there. I'm just going to quickly go over a few things that you might want to look for in a good potting mix. Though, like, not all potting mixes are created equal. There are different consistencies. So there's very fine grained ones, and then there's they go from fine grain basically with like a high porosity, which essentially means a lot of perlite usually for good aeration, and then they go anywhere from that to like a very coarse blend that has like a lot of organic matter, which is a fancy way of saying sticks, twigs and stuff like that. Personally, I like to use something with like the cocoa core blend, because core has a very coarse and stringy kind of texture, which is excellent for soil blocks, because when you have soil blocks, a lot of people struggle with them falling apart. So that's something you want to consider when you're doing a soil block with potting mix. That's a pre-blended potting mix. You want something with not too much perlite, because perlite makes it crumblier, and that's the opposite of what you want. So lower perlite and higher organic matter, and if you have a peat core blend, that's ideal in my experience, because the core and the organic matter, i.e. sticks, act kind of like a kind of like rebar when you're making concrete. It just kind of holds things together. They kind of tangle up and make for a soil block that is much more robust and is less likely to fall apart when you water. I find that a lot of people, that's their feedback when they're first getting into soil blocking, is they say, well, when I water them, they kind of fall apart. It's very possible you're using a soil mix that is just too fine, and so there's nothing like to hold them together structurally after that initial kind of compression. So when they dry out again and then you add more water, they kind of just fall apart on you. So you want something that's very coarse. That's ideal. So anyway, first thing you're going to do is mix up your potting mix so it's nice and fine. Personally, I don't mess around when it comes to that kind of stuff, and I wear these big elbow length gloves. A lot of people, you know, they think that, you know, when you're playing in the garden, everything's nice and clean and organic and good for you, and it's all, you know, get your hands dirty, get those fingers in the soil. Well, the thing about that is most potting mixes, especially if they're made from peat, have what's called a wetting agent, for one thing. Peat is hydrophobic, meaning it doesn't like water. It repels water. So they add a wetting agent so that when you're first adding water to it, it absorbs it. Otherwise, you may notice like this happens in old pots too. If your house plants, you water them and all the water kind of just drips around the edges. That's because the wetting agent has worn off and peat has gone back to its hydrophobic kind of tendency. So bear that in mind. Peat, like soil blends and potting mixes, are not really good for your hands. They say right on the bags, like, wear gloves, this stuff's bad for you. Not only that, but you know, some of the mineral additives and things like that may or may not be harmful to your skin. So just keep that. That's a little tip number one. Okay, so like I said, I don't mess around. I wear these gloves. First thing you want to do is puff up your soil so it's nice and loose. You don't want a lot of big chunks in there. Then you're going to add your water. This is mistake number 2 that I see a lot with soil blocking. When you're adding your water, you don't want to overdo it. A lot of people get it a little bit too wet, and then they end up with like a very soupy consistency, which is great for your first few blocks. But what you have to consider is every time you're making a new soil block, you're pressing out that moisture when you push in the soil blocker. So the concentration of water gets higher and higher the more soil blocks you make. So if you start off with a very soupy soil block mix to begin with, it's only going to get wetter and wetter, and the quality of your soil blocks will go down. You're going to have more trouble making good quality soil blocks as you go. The other thing that a lot of people do is they dip their blocker in a bucket of water between every soil block, which exacerbates the problem, because not only is the water ratio getting higher as you go, but you're actively adding water every time you dip that soil blocker into the water and put it back in. You're adding a little bit more water to your blend. So if you are going to do that, maybe add a little bit of potting mix as you go to kind of, you know, keep that nice balance going, so that you have nice consistent quality the whole way through. So that's tip number 2. So with that said, I'm just going to go ahead here and mix in a little bit of amendment, because my plan is to have a little bit of food to grow robustly for those first few weeks before they get transplanted in the field. Depending on what seed you grow, this is more or less important. Things like lettuce, you don't really have to worry about it as much. But today I'm doing a lot of brassicas, which require more nitrogen to get going. So I'm going to be adding some fertilizer to my mix. Okay, so I've been pretty wordy here so far, so let's get into some action now. I'm using an organic hen manure. It's just like pelleted hen manure, basically. It's an organic fertilizer. It's got an NPK of 437 for the record. I'm going to go fairly heavy on this. It's a slow release, so it's not going to have too much of a... I'm going to blast them right off the bat. It's also not good to breathe this stuff in. I usually actually, I'm kind of nerdy about this. I kind of hold my breath when I'm doing any of this mixing. Just trying to get out all these lumps and clumps. Now I'm going to add some water. So we're going to go pretty heavy here. I'm going to do about like almost a full wheelbarrow. I'm going to do almost 30 seconds worth of water. And get it nice and damp. I'm not trying to put the fear of God in you or anything when it comes to touching this stuff. I mean, it's not gonna kill you right away, but I do this all summer long, every year. So that long-term exposure, I'm just taking that extra precautionary step by wearing these big long gloves. If you're only doing this, you know, once or twice a year, I mean, I don't think you really have to worry about it. But my tip to farmers is, you know, you're already so hard on your body, why take the chance on that one extra thing, right? It's easily preventable. This water is freezing cold. Alright, so I like to just make a ball like this, and if it holds when I throw it up and down a few times, that's usually good enough. So as you can see, if I squeeze it, we're getting some water dripping out, but it's not soupy, you know, like it's holding chunks. it's still coarse. It's not like a concrete mix or anything like that. If you're getting to like mixed concrete consistency, I think you've gone a little bit too far. But either way, I'm going to do a couple trial blocks, of course, before I really get going, and we'll see how they come out. So I like to use these mesh trays myself when I'm doing soil blocks. These really allow the root pruning benefits of soil blocking. Getting a little rusty here. This is a 1.3 inch 35 cell soil blocker. You really want to slam it in, give it a couple twists, tap all that excess soil out. Then the most important thing here is getting a nice scrape so that all your soil blocks will come out the same height. If you don't do that scrape, you'll end up with like kind of a swelling at the bottom here, and then you'll get inconsistent soil blocks and then inconsistent starts, because all your starts are going to have access to different amount of nutrients. So you want to squeeze down till you see that little bit of water coming out the bottom. I don't know if you can see that. A couple taps, boom. I didn't dip this in water beforehand or anything. I'm getting beautiful soil blocks. Okay, no dipping. Couple taps, get out of the excess soil, scrape, push down till you see some water. I hope you can see these shots. Couple clicks, done. Okay, if you add that extra step of dipping the soil blocker in the bucket every time, you're adding a bit of, not only that is that an extra step, but you're diluting your soil blocks every time. So this is only going to get mushy and mushier. It's already going to do that because with every time you slam like this, right, and you push down to get them in, a little bit of water is squeezing out every time, right? So the water gets left in there. Couple clicks, bang, still looking good. Oh my goodness. Now let's do another one. And when you get a groove, you can really cook along and get a lot of these done in no time flat. Okay. All right, so that's how I do my soil blocking for the most part. I'm 90% of the time using the 35 block, more semi-mass production blocker. There's all kinds of different dimensions, and you can even get big ones now that do like full flats. There's a lot of advancements going on in the soil blocking world right now, which is good to see. I think that, you know, I've in my whole career as a farmer, I've either used soil blocks, and then last year I started using paper pots. I've never really used plug trays. I don't like using them. They never last. The wind strips seem pretty good, but they're mighty expensive, and I just don't have the budget for that right now. Soil blocks are just so economically sound, and they're great for the environment comparatively. I mean, yes, you're using these black mesh trays, but they're, I'd say, you know, 75% air. Comparatively, you're not using that much plastic. I'm not using bottom trays for these. And then there's, like, you know, your paper pot trays. I could be using these as well, but I just find that these don't prune the roots as well. And that is one of the main benefits of soil blocking is when the plants grow in here, underneath, there's never any binding of the roots or circling, because they're pruned. When they hit that air, they die, and then when you transplant them, the tips of those roots are just ready to go, and they know exactly where to go, which is straight out, and you get much better establishment. They can be a little bit trickier to get apart, because they will grow. If you leave them in too long, they will grow into each other a little bit. But if you time your transplants correctly, that's not too bad. And actually, a little bit of tangling is good, because then you can pick up. What I like to do is I'll pick up one of these cubes in my hand, kind of like a little mini tray, and then you can walk around with that and just pull one apart as you go and drop them down. It's really, really fast and easy to work that way. In my first 2 seasons, I did all of my starts either with the 20 block mini. I did all my lettuces and stuff in this to start, and then I'd pot them up. And then the 2-inch soil blocker, this guy right here. Everything's really covered in cobwebs right now because I'm just getting started for the season. But so if you can imagine, you know, 4 cells at a time on even a small scale like mine, that was just crazy. And by the end of the year, I had tendonitis in my forearm, and it was just not good. So if you are planning on using this oil blocker and you're doing even like a remotely large amount of seeds, I recommend starting with something like this. They're, you know, $200-300 and totally worth the investment. So anyway, I hope that was helpful. I'll be doing more videos in the future on soil blocks, but today I just wanted to do something really quick. And the main thing I wanted to get across today, though, was the soil consistency, and then what kind of potting mix to look for. Because again, I think those are the 2 biggest mistakes that turn people off of soil blocking in the first place, is they're not using something coarse enough, and then they're adding too much water. Water is a very sticky substance. It wants to stay together, so you're pushing it down in, and you're making a little pool on the base of the bin. And then when you go to pull it up, that water kind of creates a vacuum effect and wants to hold it together. So you pull it up, and a lot of the blocks might come out empty or half full. So stay on the dry side. You can always add more water once you get that dialed in. Try to avoid doing the dip. You know, I'm all for dipping, even double dipping, but sometimes the dipping needs a skipping. With that, that's all I have to say. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next one. Ciao.